Hi, my name is Morgan Byrne. I'm the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, and this is a pre-recorded version of the General Education Alignment Maps Revisit and Review section. Now, I will say up top that the live version of this session included a discussion amongst faculty and also the distribution of individual assessment reports and gen ed alignment maps. So in the interest of making sure we don't have any tech issues, this pre-recording hits all of the highlights, all of the common errors that the assessment committee has noticed when going over gen ed alignment maps, and some of the highlights when it comes to general education student performance data, or the lack thereof, in our previous round of spring program assessment reports. So this will include some of those discussion questions, but it does not have that live component of the faculty speaking one-on-one with each other and things of that nature, just because we didn't really have the tech in the room for that at the time. So this is the recorded version instead. So the agenda for this session is as follows. We're going to be going over gen ed alignment maps, strengths and weaknesses, talking about general education performance data, and then finally our revise and resubmit campaign, launching it this August 2026, concluding at the end of September 2026. So if you are missing some of that general education student performance data, you do have the opportunity to revise your assessment report and send a stronger one. In fact, we highly encourage it. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. The outcomes for this session: by the conclusion, you will be able to examine general education alignment maps for gaps and revise general education alignment maps and program assessment reports as needed. Again, make sure that you are looking at the feedback that was provided to you by the assessment committee. All of the assessment committee members were working hard over the summer to make sure that assessment reports were returned well in advance of everyone's return to campus. So please make sure that you are looking at the feedback that was provided. That feedback is there to make sure that you are digging into the amount of the student performance data that you've got in the most appropriate way, not just so that you've got evidence of student learning in your course or courses and the things that you're going to do to continue improving that, but it also makes it a lot easier for those of us that are compiling all of these success stories to make sure that we've got appropriate evidence for our assurance argument. So the goal of a general education alignment map, these were launched last year. These are meant to do the following: illustrate clear and sensical alignment between general education outcomes and relevant assessment measures, and allow for the identification of gaps within a given program. For example, if when you were filling out your general education alignment map, you noticed that nowhere in your program is cultural intelligence embedded or assessed, that is a glaring issue and that needs to be addressed. So this is not a punitive process. No one is in trouble. Assessment as a procedure exists so that we can look at areas of strength and weakness and address those weaknesses. It is not to make sure that everyone is perfect all the time. That simply is not feasible. So no one's in trouble or anything, but we do need to make sure to identify these gaps. If there is a gen ed outcome that is not embedded in that program, if you are noting the assignments that are being used to assess these general education outcomes, but the word is just essay, that's really not giving us the information that we need. So the goal of creating these maps initially was to see what's working, what's not, what's missing, what can be improved, what alignment maybe is kind of shaky now in 2026 and might need to be addressed going forward. That was really the impetus for putting these together. And as a reminder, we do have those new general education rubrics. So those were completed during the summer of 2025. They also went through faculty council during our last academic year. They are live. You can access those inside the assessment forms and resources course shell. You're just going to go on down to general education assessment, select refresher, and every single one of those rubrics is available to you if you grade with rubrics. And hopefully if you don't use a rubric, you do still have some other assessment metric, and it's not just attendance, because we know from our studies and the discussions we've had over the last 2 years, somebody being present in a room does not dictate whether or not they are understanding and able to apply that material that they are learning. If you are utilizing rubrics, incorporating the components from these general education rubrics into your own can make it so much easier to get that data that you need. So again, those are in that one location. They're also available in SharePoint, but you can get all of them there in that assessment course shell that you're already very familiar with. Now, in the live version, we asked faculty, upon creating your alignment map, what did you notice about your program or multiple programs? We do have some faculty that kind of, oversee multiple programs. And in the interest of keeping this video short, I am going to move forward. However, I do want to note there were common areas for improvement, in addition to anything that may have been shared anecdotally during that session. And those included missing outcomes. Again, we might have, looking at a program, cultural intelligence, numerical literacy, critical thinking. One of those may not be embedded. That is an issue. Right, that has to be addressed. We also have vague or weak alignment, which usually happens in tandem with a nebulous assessment measure. I mentioned a couple minutes ago that the word essay by itself effectively means nothing. An argumentative essay and an explication are fundamentally different types of writing. If you are saying that you are using an essay in a PTA course and I'm just picking on PTA as an example, the PTA stuff is great, but let's say hypothetically in a PTA course I said, oh yeah, well, we use an essay to assess critical thinking. As an English instructor, I'm going to think, yeah, okay, well, that makes a certain level of sense, but what kind of critical thinking is happening? Because again, something like a literature review, maybe you're just providing summaries of the research that's been conducted. You still had to critically think about the sources being selected. There is a process, a vetting process for that. But writing a summary is nowhere near as involved as putting together something like an argumentative essay, an explication, etc. So we need to be really clear about what the assignment is, how it works, what students are specifically being asked to do, and that's going to clear up some of that alignment as well. And then finally, missing courses in the second column. There is a section that asks faculty to list all courses in the program in which specific gen ed outcomes are embedded. And then in the column after that, the specific course in which that outcome is being assessed. So it may be embedded in several different courses, but like which specific assignment in which course are you going to use to get that student performance data? So these were some of the big issues that we noted as a committee as we were moving through these different gen ed alignment maps. And again, this does not mean anybody's in trouble or that anybody's stupid. That's not it. We do, however, just want to make sure that we are really using these maps, and if issues are being identified, they're being addressed. In the, spirit of addressing issues, we're going to look at a hypothetical and bad example of a gen ed alignment map together. I made this last week. I'll make it a little bigger. Okay. So we can see the general template here. We've got the program is hair metal appreciation. So it's all fake. Professor Sammy Hagar. I'm sure somebody is thinking Sammy Hagar is not even hair metal, like Van Halen's not even hair metal, and sure, we're not going to get into the weeds of that. We see all of our gen ed outcomes over here. So we have communication, written and oral, critical thinking, cultural intelligence. Oh my goodness, that is a typo. We're going to fix that. Okay. And then numerical literacy. So we have our outcomes. That is part of the template that you receive. So don't need to do anything with that. All of that is going to be standard. Unfortunately, that may mean the template that you received is like the template I received that has the typo in it. So definitely want to make sure we don't have that. Okay, next we have all courses where general education outcomes are embedded. So in the case of written communication, we've got 2 courses. Oral communication, we have 3. Critical thinking, 3. Cultural intelligence, 3. Numerical literacy, nothing. And you'll see here that nothing continues. If I were Sammy Hagar in this example, the creation of my gen ed alignment map would prompt me to, number 1, figure out where do I need to have how can I assess numerical literacy? The good news is with something like a music appreciation program, right? You might have something like music theory. Music theory involves some elements of numerical literacy. You could plug that in there. But right now, that's a gaping hole. And that has to be addressed. So that's issue number 1. There are a variety of other issues here, though. For example, let's go ahead and move to our penultimate and final column over here. So we do, for the most part, we don't have anything for numerical literacy, but we do have the course used to assess that gen ed outcome. And we do have the assignment, but look at the nature of the assignments. This does say explication essay, and sure, all right, it's for ballad writing, so we're looking at lyrics, we're breaking lyrics apart, we're doing a close reading. That makes sense. How long is it? How rigorous is it? What are these specific requirements for it? Are they writing their own ballad and then breaking it down? Like, how specifically does this correspond to written communication? I know that may seem kind of silly, right? Like, it's an essay. Of course it works for communication, written communication in particular. But there's really nothing about this assignment other than its title. And think of it if you were a student. If a professor told you, you're going to do an explication essay, and that was it, you'd be like, huh? How do you want me to do it? So that's not super helpful. And we do see it gets worse as we move farther down. Oral communication is being assessed through a 20-minute presentation, but a 20-minute presentation of what stripe? What kind of presentation? Considering it's in Mastering the Scream, I can assume they're going to be doing some screaming elements, but why and how? And is it like is it process oriented? That's pretty common in communications courses, or areas in which you were assessing communication anyway, but what kind of presentation? Similarly, what kind of analysis? Or, arguably the most egregious in this column, we have for cultural intelligence, a guest speaker survey as the assessment measure. We've talked at length about direct and indirect kinds of assessment. Direct assessment being the student is actively demonstrating what they have learned and how they can apply what they've learned based upon the content of the course. Indirect assessment is based on perceived knowledge and understanding. That's where we get things like reflections and surveys. And while they can be great when we're looking to paint a large comprehensive picture of what's going on in a given course, this is program assessment of a gen ed outcome. This is big picture. And by itself, a survey is not going to do much of anything. This isn't having the students demonstrate what they've learned about cultural intelligence. It's just whether or not they listened to a guest speaker. And I'm sure that guest speaker had a lot to impart about rock music around the world in this case, but that survey's not super helpful. So this example is riddled with errors, and we will go over that as a team during this session, but these are hyperbolic examples of some of the most common areas of issue that we encountered as we were working on these general education alignment maps as a committee. So when we're thinking about these revisions, so let's say that hypothetically you are missing cultural intelligence, numerical literacy, what have you, and you think, yeah, I got to get that into one of these courses, I'm going to work on that. Please remember that some revisions may constitute curriculum changes. Please consider the curriculum committee's timeline and submit your proposed revisions in a timely fashion. The curriculum committee is always busy, and they are also very vocal about their timelines and their dates for when things are due. Please, please, please make sure that you are keeping track of that if you intend to make any changes. Because if you're going to move that little box check on your course syllabus from gen ed, or not gen ed, from like critical thinking to cultural intelligence, or you're going to add numerical literacy, that does have to go through curriculum. So if you're going to make these changes, remember there is that process that you are going to have to go through to make sure that everything is happening above board. Now on the back end, if we're looking at, we started with the alignment map and how things are aligned and assessed. Let's talk about the end of that process, those assessment reports being turned in. So during the spring 26th semester, we talked about this in executive and faculty council at multiple points, 2 questions were added to the program assessment report. These questions ask the author of the report to select the general education outcome being assessed and to analyze student performance in relation to that outcome. So we don't have a separate form just for general education student performance. It's embedded in the program assessment report. Everybody, not just the assessment committee, but faculty overall, we're fine with that. And in the back half of this session, we're going to talk about some of the highlights, but also some inconsistencies that we noticed. So we're going to go ahead and start with this statement here. Let's say that, hypothetically, you are looking at the general education portion of a program assessment report, and the response to the question asking about student performance only says, quote, all students achieved the outcome, unquote. What is wrong with this statement? And I know that everybody in attendance at this session is going to answer in probably the same way. How do you prove it? Right? And also, too, students achieving the outcome does not mean they achieved the outcome in the same way if we are treating a C as success, right? And I have trouble with that framework often. But if we are looking at it from a C or better standpoint, students performing at a C level and students performing at an A level are creating fundamentally different artifacts. Their understanding is fundamentally different, especially, too, if you're looking at the breakdown and more students got a B or a C than an A. Well, yeah, they all achieved the outcome, but there are extant problems here, and those need to be discussed. So it's great if they're achieving the outcome. We definitely want that. But just like we've been talking about with course and with program assessment, you do still have to talk about the in-depth performance data when it comes to general education as well. Just this statement alone tells us nothing. And it also opens you up as the instructor for somebody to go, I don't believe it. Prove it. And I tell my students that, too, right? If a student tells me in one of their essays, this thing is true, and they don't have evidence to back that up, I'm going to go into that rough draft and say, huh? How? Where? Prove it. Cite it. And that is something that we have been dinged on consistently when it comes to our accreditation documents. We've been working really hard over the last few years to improve course and program and gen ed data, but that doesn't mean that things are perfect. We're in a much better place now than we were this time 2 years ago, but this is that last step that we really need to nail. The foundation is there. We've got really great success stories that I highlighted in another session, but we got to make sure everybody's on the same page. So we have some pretty common areas for improvement here when it comes to these general education sections of the program assessment reports, and those are alignment, being clear about how this assessment measure aligns with the general education outcome. If the outcome is critical thinking, for example, how does this measure task students to think critically? Detail. Generally, performance on course and program learning outcomes is improving. However, the same level of detail needs to be paid to gen ed just as much as it is to program and course. You guys nail course and program. Let's take all of those skills you already have and make sure to apply it to gen ed. And I mentioned this in another session. It's entirely possible that, like some students, you were tired at the end of the semester and, you got to that gen ed piece and you thought, okay, yeah, this is enough. I'm moving on. I've got other stuff to submit, which is why we're doing that revise and resubmit option. We totally understand. You have the skills to do this. We just need to see it. And then finally, the improvement / maintenance options. Make sure to consider general education outcome performance in your improvement or maintenance plan. Otherwise, that plan is not complete, especially if we're looking at that hypothetical example I mentioned a second ago. If students are meeting that outcome, but they're getting B's and C's, or performing in that general area with regard to that outcome, there's improvements to be made, and that needs to be addressed, absolutely. So, the assessment committee is happy to accept revised assessment reports. Please make sure to submit your revised program assessment reports to the program assessment submission portal for spring 26 in the Blackboard course shell. These revisions should be completed by Friday, September 25th. As of recording this, I'm recording this on August 13th, so that's over a month from now, but even when I launch this in service, it will still be over a month from the launch date. So you would really just be focusing on those two questions. What's the gen ed outcome? How did they perform? That is it. We have had faculty submit a totally separate document. They didn't redo the entire report. They just focused on gen ed. You can do that. That is fine. We just really need to make sure we are seeing what's going on in these courses and that that's being reported effectively. Ultimately, assessment is all about driving student success. Without it, we cannot prove that success has been demonstrated at all. And we know that students are succeeding. Everything that's happening at the course and program level is fantastic. It's just got to happen at the gen ed level too. And we know that HLC is going to be focused on it, as they should, right? It's been an area of concern for us for a while. And we need to show all the hard work that we have put in, that you guys have been demonstrating over these last few years. We just need to get this last leg, and we'll be in a really good spot. As always, thank you so much for watching this. If you are watching this at some point adjacent to the Fall 26 in service, please by all means scan that QR code and complete the survey. If for some reason you are seeing this 2-3 years from now, your feedback is appreciated, but I'm not really looking at it anymore. But regardless, thank you so much for watching this video. If you've got questions, comments, concerns, or anxieties about Gen Ed data and reporting, please by all means let me know. Otherwise, thank you so much and have a great day.